Welcome back into the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap, presented as always by Full Press Coverage. Sap, the NCAA tournament resumes today with the Sweet 16. And while we don't talk about college basketball all that much on this show, except for when we're getting ready for the NBA draft, today could be significant because it could be the last time we see Coach K on the sidelines for Duke, as he's already announced that he's retiring at the end of the season, and as the tournament is one game elimination, his coaching career can come to an end just like that. So it had you and myself thinking about sort of his legacy, Sap, and especially how that legacy has played out in the NBA. So when you think of Coach K, obviously, you think of his success at Duke. What else comes to mind, Sap, when you think about him?
Well, you consider his success at Duke, 5 national championships, and also as head coach of Team USA. How many times has he coached Team USA to gold medals? And not that that's a great accomplishment, but he seems to be one guy who was a college coach who was cut out to also coach the pros. We saw that Greg Popovich took over the job and did win a gold medal at the last Olympics, but it wasn't as smooth to say as it was with Coach K. I just got to thinking, Jet, that here's a guy who has 5 national championships, which is incredible. The only coach with more is John Wooden, and half of Wooden's national championships came with the then Lou Alcindor 3 times and Bill Walton twice. So I think you or I probably could have won those national championships with all-time great players like that. But John Wooden did win 5 other national championships without Alcindor and Bill Walton.
60 straight games or something like that, right?
Yeah, 88, I believe it
88,
was.
Okay, that was not even close. So
crazy. It was like, UCLA won every single game during Alcindor lost once to Elvin Hayes and then destroyed him in the tournament. And Bill Walton lost a couple games. One was to Notre Dame, and then one was to, I believe, NC State in the Final Four. So, I mean, that program was at another level. They generally recruited the best players from Southern California. They dominated that league. The tournament was different than it is now. But nonetheless, when you win 10 national championships, it's quite an accomplishment. I mean, the 60s was dominated by John Wooden in college basketball, Red Auerbach in the NBA, and Vince Lombardi in the NFL. I mean, every year those 3 teams won, right? It was UCLA, the Celtics, and the Packers. And the early part of the 60s, it was the Yankees and the Canadians in hockey. It's like every year
was good time to lay parlays in the in the betting world. Very easy parlays.
Yeah, the Celtics are going to win. The Yankees are going to win. The Packers are going to win. UCLA is going to win, and the Montreal Canadiens are going to win. It was really boring. I wasn't around that much for it because I'm not that old, but I do remember John Wooden's last national championship was in 1975, and then he retired. So maybe Coach K can have a similar end to the way John Wooden's career ended, win his last game in the national championship game, and then, that's it. I don't think that's likely. I don't think Duke's going to win the national championship. They've been very inconsistent. But the thing that sticks out to me, which is amazing, is he hasn't really produced many great NBA players, right? When you really look at it, Grant Hill's the best player that he's produced. That's the only player he's ever produced that has made it to the Hall of Fame. Now, after Grant Hill, I would say Kyrie Irving and Jason Tatum are the 2 best players after Grant Hill, probably both more talented than Grant Hill. And I think eventually Kyrie and Jason Tatum can make it into the Hall of Fame. But that's the thing that stood out, is he was able to win so much without guys that went to the next level and dominated at the NBA level. And that, to me, really shows what a great coach this guy was, and that he prepared these guys to play the right way, but it maybe didn't translate into the NBA. You look at Christian Laettner, who I think is one of the 5 or 6 greatest collegiate players ever. I mean, in 4 years, Duke went to the Final Four all 4 years, won back-to-back national championships in 91, 92, was the 3rd pick in the 92 draft behind Shaq and Alonzo Mourning. Had a nice career, but he's not a Hall of Famer. Shane Battier, Elton Brand, J.J. Redick, all really nice careers. They're not going to sniff the Hall of Fame. it's amazing that Grant Hill is the only Hall of Fame player that Coach K has had. And again, I think Tatum and Irving eventually can get there, but Tatum and Irving didn't win at Duke. Hell, Irving played 10 games at Duke his freshman
Right.
year, and then
It's a
went
good
right to the
preview of what was to come in the NBA.
There you go. Yeah, he played only 10 games, had the toe injury, and was still the number one pick. Tatum played 29 games at Duke his freshman year, and then declared himself for the draft and was the third overall pick. So that's the thing that sticks out to me, Jet. That here's a guy who just had an incredible 40-year run at Duke, but not a lot of great NBA players.
Yeah, it's interesting, because like obviously, like you said, he's had one of, if not the greatest, coaching resume in college basketball history. And you would think that would translate to more great NBA players, except for, sometimes the jump from Division I to college, actually, oftentimes I should say it's hard to predict. Like, some of these guys were immensely talented still, and they went high in the draft, and they just didn't pan out in the NBA. So they had like the requisite physical skills, you would think, and for some reason it just didn't work out. Like, let's say, for example, Mike Dunleavy Jr. I think he was the third pick. Yeah, okay. So really highly touted, just never really found his footing in the NBA. Jahlil Okafor was the third pick.
Yeah. Jabari Parker was the second pick.
Yeah, Jabari Parker kind of got derailed by injuries, so I don't know what to think there. But Jahlil Okafor just became sort of a dinosaur in the NBA quickly. He came in at the wrong time. And there's a lot of players that I'm looking at on the list I have in front of me of that went to Duke under Coach K, and were lottery picks and just didn't end up panning out to be great players. An interesting example, and probably one of the best NBA players that Coach K has coached, was JJ Redick, who it took him a while. He looked like he was going to flame out of the league, Sap, and he kind of found his footing on like his second team, or like late in his Orlando career. It took him 3, 4, 5 years to really establish himself as a quality NBA player. And then, you look at other guys who like Carlos Boozer, who was a second round pick and sort of found immediate success in the NBA. So I don't know if this is a Coach K thing or if it's just an NBA thing where the scouting is just, it's tough. It's tough to nail this thing down.
You look at Jay Williams, who was the second overall pick, looked very promising with Chicago, and then was in a motorcycle accident and was never the same guy, right? When you talk about JJ Redick, the league came to him, right? Because he was a really good three-point shooter, and now that became more important after 4 or 5 years in the league. So the sport came to JJ Redick, and he had a really nice career. Shane Battier was a guy who was like the perfect team player. Like LeBron James loved playing with him in Miami, and they won a couple of championships together, and it worked out really well. So, yeah, I mean, these are all really good players. Elton Brand was the first pick in the draft and was
had a very good career. Yeah.
Had a good career, but never quite to the level that you would think where they were drafted. Whereas, you look at Grant Hill, who I believe was the third pick in the draft that year. He had the best career of any Duke Blue Devil, without question. I think Kyrie, we can make a case, is the most talented of all these players. And I think Jason Tatum may end up having the best career of them all, because already in his fifth year, he's just getting better every single season. And, down the road is going to be an MVP candidate. I mean, a Duke Blue Devil has never won an NBA MVP. Grant Hill finished top 5 a few times because Grant Hill was actually trending to become the best player in basketball, but then he suffered injuries.
Injury after injury after injury. Yeah. Right when he left Detroit and went to Orlando, his career really started going, getting bogged down by injuries. And then he had like a late career resurgence in Phoenix, who has long been established as having like the best medical staff in Phoenix, and like I think they work wonders for him. But yeah, I mean, Grant Hill, obviously fantastic. What I'd say one of the best collegiate players as well, and I think a worthy NBA Hall of Famer or basketball Hall of Famer.
I've always been a Grant Hill fan. It almost comes across as like the Derek Jeter of basketball, just a class act, a guy who never says the wrong thing. Now he's heading up USA Basketball. He did the games on CBS. Just someone who's eminently likable. I mean, more likable than Jeter, to be quite honest with you. Yeah, I mean, he belongs in the Hall of Fame. I always thought, because now when you look at the Hall of Fame, and we've kind of had this discussion before, Jed, do you take their collegiate careers and couple it with their NBA careers, and that's what it is? Because then, Christian Laettner should be a candidate. He was, again, one of the 5 or 6 best collegians I've ever seen. For my money, the then Lou Alcindor is the greatest collegiate player ever. 3 years, 3 national championships. It was just, he was literally a man playing among boys. Bill Walton was incredible. Then you can go right on down the line. Magic Johnson. Larry Bird didn't win a national championship, but he took 4 other guys to the national championship game. It's just phenomenal. But
Bill Russell at San Francisco. Yeah.
Back-to-back national championships, of course. But Laettner was a great collegian. And now he had a nice career in the NBA. I think he made the All-Star team once. The problem is Laettner, to me, is the poster boy for Duke. He and probably JJ Redick as like the 2 guys that come across as preppies, like, that they're punchable, right? I mean, like Christian Laettner and
Grayson Allen.
Grayson Allen may be actually better than both of them. You're right. I mean, he really is, because he's not the player those guys were. And I think JJ Redick now has become popular with his podcast and is a really good analyst. Christian Laettner was hated when he was playing. I mean, you just looked at him and said, yeah, that guy went to Duke, or it just looked like a Dookie. The hair, the looks. I mean, a good looking guy, really smarmy. It's just a guy you didn't want to like. And you know what? One of those guys that was comfortable with that. He was not afraid to be booed. But, is he a Hall of Famer? No. His collegiate level was very, very high, but then his NBA level was slightly above average. Again, Grant Hill's the only one in.
Well, there is a college basketball Hall of Fame, and the Hall of Fame that's in Springfield is considered the Basketball Hall of Fame. So the way I look at it is that you probably have to be exceptional at both to get in, college and the NBA. Now, obviously, if you make the NBA, you were exceptional in college. That just stands to reason, right? Now, obviously, I think the standard is going to have to change, because there's so many one and dones, and obviously there's kids who people who came straight out of high school, so it's not just, you can't just look at it, okay, how good were they in college, how good were they in the NBA? But I do think that they weigh your professional career far more than they weigh your collegiate career.
Right. Yeah, I think that's for sure. My guy Marcus Johnson's a finalist for the Basketball Hall of Fame, and I've always pushed for him to make it. He made the All-Star team 5 times, and there's plenty of guys in the Basketball Hall of Fame that made fewer All-Star games. And he was also Collegiate Player of the Year in 1977, won a national championship at UCLA. I think you put the 2 together, you have a Hall of Famer. But that's a different discussion for a different day, although it's not that far away. I believe it's April 1st when they're going to announce the class of 2022. Yeah, the Duke guys, why they haven't translated to the NBA, it's whereas the Kentucky guys, who under Calipari have won 1 national championship, and currently there are 24 players in the NBA that went to Kentucky. And it seems like, you get to the All-Star game and you've got Anthony Davis, Karl Anthony Towns, Devin Booker. I mean, it's just loaded with Kentucky guys, because they're all one and done. And I give Coach K credit. He adapted and was not like the old guy who pushed back against the one and done, something like Bobby Knight would have pushed back against. Coach K realized, well, this is how it's done now. I've got to embrace this and deal with it. So now you see the Duke guys one and done. Kyrie Irving, Jason Tatum, a lot of great players. So he's been able to adapt to that. It's so difficult when you really think about it, that let me compare it to this, Jet. USC has always been considered a football power, right? I mean, it's one of the most
traditionally, yes.
Traditionally,
no.
And I think with Lincoln Riley there, it's going to pop up again. But overall,
yes, definitely
pretty good. You realize that a USC quarterback has never started a Super Bowl?
Yeah, that's wild.
Whereas a BC quarterback has, and Matt Ryan. So it's just like,
Two BC quarterbacks, Matt Hasselbeck also.
that's right. That's right. That's a good point. Yeah, with Seattle in the '05 season. Yeah, two BC quarterbacks, but nobody from USC, and USC is, for many years a top 5 program. But they've produced a lot of pro quarterbacks, but none great. I mean, I'd put my money on Carson Palmer being the best of the group, and if he hadn't got hurt, I think he may have gotten to a Super Bowl, may have got to the Hall of Fame. But just look at all the other guys they produced, from Sam Darnold to Mark Sanchez, good quarterbacks, but, not at the highest level. So
Right.
it's kind of like that, where here's Duke that's always in there. And he builds a full team. So it's deeper. Guys have roles. He coaches well. And in the end, winning 5 national championships. And again, they're stretched out, which is pretty impressive. 91, 92, 2001, 2010, and 2015. Think about that. 25 years apart from his first to his fifth. That's damn impressive.
Yeah. I think that's a good comparison, Sap, because I was thinking, in college, a lot of times when the draft comes up for the NFL in college football and stuff, you're looking at the system that they played in, not necessarily the coach that they played for, but I'm saying, like, okay, do they run a spread offense? Do they run like a triple option? And that might affect their draft stock. But the guys who come from a pro style system, like USC is mostly run a pro style system, that
Yep.
seems to be, advantageous when teams are looking at you to draft you, because you think, okay, we can just plug them in, a lot of similar concepts. There, to that same vein, in the NBA, it's not as much of a variance in college with what teams run, but there are some weird offenses or defenses that teams run. Princeton offense, Syracuse plays that zone under Jim Boeheim that they've played forever. But Duke runs basically an NBA offense and an NBA defense. I mean,
Yep.
Coach K did that, in the Olympics, and I don't believe he lost the game in the 3 Olympics he coached. They won 3 gold medals. So you would think, okay, there shouldn't be that much of a learning curve, other than the, athletic learning curve that you're, facing, playing against bigger, faster, stronger. But the ACC has traditionally been a very good conference where you're facing other NBA players, and Duke, in their own practices are facing other NBA players. So it is curious why there haven't been more guys that have gone to Duke that have been successful, especially because the guys that he's recruited since he's taken over have all been high recruits. Now, recently, if you look at the past 10 years, Sap, the guys who have been in one and dones all look like they're headed towards, multiple all-star games, potential Hall of Fame careers. You mentioned Kyrie Irving, Jason Tatum, Brandon Ingram. I don't know that he's going to be a Hall of Famer, but he's already one of the better Duke players in terms of how he's translated to the NBA, just his scoring. RJ Barrett looks like he's off to a nice career. If Zion Williamson could ever get healthy, he should have a really nice career. So it's the guys who have played less for Duke who seem to have found more easy success in the NBA. I don't think anybody can really definitively explain it.
No, other than maybe he's such a great coach that he gets the most out of them, that when they get to the NBA, they don't really have that much room to grow, other than the one and dones. And that's been more popular the last decade with the likes of Kyrie Irving, Jason Tatum, and Zion and Brandon Ingram, right? So those guys are so good that they're one and done. So again, those guys are still fairly young. We're going to have to see how their careers play out. I feel confident that if Kyrie plays enough games, he's a Hall of Famer, and I'm confident if Jason Tatum continues to just do what he's doing and get better, that he's going to be a Hall of Famer. Zion has Hall of Fame ability. It's just, as you said, Jed, he has to stay healthy at some point and play. That's pretty important. But yeah, it's pretty fascinating. The guy is obviously one of, if not the greatest collegiate coach ever. And again, his ability to adapt, I think, is pretty interesting. And early in his stay at Duke, he would get to the Final Four and lose. It was almost as if, is this guy ever going to break through? And then he broke through in the national semifinal in '91 against the defending champion UNLV Running Rebels, who looked unbeatable. I mean, that is one of the greatest teams we ever saw. Duke was able to win, and then 2 nights later beat Kansas, and then the rest is history. And again, to win 5 national championships that far apart with different types of games, different types of players, different eras. That's fascinating. I mean, as I said, Wooden won 10 and 12 years, and half of them were with two all-time great centers. And I'm not taking anything away from John Wooden because he's an all-time great as well. Bobby Knight, he won 3 national championships in about a 12-year period. He had great players as well, but he also was a fabulous coach, but he just didn't adapt the way that Coach K adapted. And I think that's what makes him a special coach, arguably the best that's ever done it.
Yeah. Sap, it's the nature of how you win a national championship in college basketball it's difficult because it's one game elimination. So
Yes.
you could have one off night, you're done. So to win multiple of them is obviously very impressive. And, you look at another great coach, like you said, John Calipari, he's just won the one at Kentucky. And I see they were highly seeded. They were 2 seed this year and they lost in the first round, and fans are getting impatient Kentucky and calling for his job. It's hard. It's hard to win a college national championship because you have no room for error in the tournament.
Yeah, I mean, I picked Kentucky to win the tournament this time around, and they were done the very first day of the tournament, or the third day of the tournament, obviously after the, play-in games. But yeah, I thought that they would advance and win the whole thing, and they were gone. It's difficult. Look at Gonzaga. Gonzaga's had a great program for nearly 20 years under Mark Few, and they've played in 2 national championship games and lost. I mean, I thought last year was the year.
And I think they've been to like 4 consecutive Elite Eights or something like that.
They're always there. Yeah, they're always in the discussion. And that's the other thing with Coach K. He's gone to 12 Final Fours. Like, that's crazy, really. And that's just, again, you just look at it and go, wow, this guy's just a little bit different than other coaches. And then the success with the Olympics, again, the talent's there. I get that. But he moves seamlessly from college to the Olympics. Now, he probably would have had a second Hall of Famer if this player decided to go to college for 1 year, and that was Kobe Bryant, because most of the reports were Kobe was going to go to Duke, but then he decided to declare himself after high school. So obviously, if Kobe went to Duke, he would have had his second Hall of Famer.
Yeah, just to wrap it up with the Coach K thing before we move on, he's obviously a great coach. I kind of think that he's become a little bit, full of himself, and heard all these, accolades about himself over the year. I don't think he's the greatest sportsman in the world, which you don't have to be, but, I think he in his later years, he's gotten a little bit more prickly. And, no one likes Duke except for Duke fans. So it's, easy to root against him, not personally. Seems like a nice guy personally, good family man and stuff like that. But he's a little smarmy.
Again, I think he's good friends with Bill Belichick. So there's some similarity there. Yeah, I mean, Belichick's friends have always been other elite coaches. I'll guarantee you Belichick's friends with Popovich, Coach K. I know Tony La Russa, all the all-time great coaches.
Interesting that Popovich, Coach K, and Belichick all have military family backgrounds as well.
Exactly. Right. And they treat it that way. So I think just in general, as you get older, you become prickly. You wake up in the morning, your foot hurts, your shoulder hurts, your back hurts, your eyes aren't as good. So,
but,
he's
yet he still is able to recruit these top high school players.
Yeah, that's pretty impressive. Yeah, so that's where he's special, in that he's been able to adapt. And that's, I don't know if Belichick's adapted. I don't know if Popovich is adapted. I mean, I think they may be set in their ways, whereas Coach K, maybe because he's at the collegiate level and he has no choice, but he's around younger people, but he's adapted better than those guys. And look, they've all had ridiculous careers. You can make a case that they're the best at what they've done in their respective sports. But yeah, I think he's adapted even better than those guys. He's had to, because the one and done is here to stay for the foreseeable future. It's not going away.
No, and the only thing that might impact it is, if there might be less one and dones if the NBA does away with that rule and lets the high school players come back again, which they should. that might lead to more players who come to the college and want to play for longer, as it did when the high school players were allowed to come. So, but I think you're right. I think it's here to stay. I mean, there's just too much money to be made to toil away in college.
Well, now with
But
NIL, I think that can help the players.
yeah,
right?
that's true. That can also help them.
You can start making money in college, which is a good thing. So maybe you stay a little longer, although I would still, if you're an elite talent, go get the money from the NBA, because you want to start that clock ticking to get your second contract, which is a big contract, rather than toil in college for 3 years and you lose that opportunity. Just think about all the great players that spent 4 years in college. Patrick Ewing, Tim Duncan spent 4 years in college. Michael Jordan spent 3 years in college, and those guys were all ready after their freshman year to join the NBA, but they stayed that much longer.
Yeah. I mean, if they all were playing now, they all would have gone right after their freshman year.
Without question.
All right. So while, on the subject of Duke, it's an easy transition to, like you said, one of the best players that he's ever produced at Duke, Kyrie Irving, who is also one of the worst people he's ever produced. If you've listened to just a single episode of this show, you know my thoughts on Kyrie. I detest the guy. But he's now going to be able to play in home games, which is a change from what it's been the entire season, because he's refused to get vaccinated. He hasn't really explained why. He's had a lot of, saying, oh, he's standing up for people who's lost their jobs. He doesn't believe in this. I don't know. This guy's out of his freaking mind. But the important thing for the Nets is that now he can play as the mayor of New York City has rolled back the city's mandates for employees going into their place of work if they are unvaccinated. That's what's kept Kyrie out. That is being rolled back today officially. And now Kyrie can play in all the games for the Nets, barring the ones they play in Canada, because Canada is still not going to let unvaccinated players play there. So, Sap, what does this do to the Nets now?
Well, I'm glad it's happened. I mean, we talked about this 3 weeks ago, and I thought it was ludicrous that he could sit on the bench, but he couldn't play. Visiting players who weren't vaccinated could play, but Kyrie couldn't play. I thought it was just absolutely stupid. So I'm glad he's able to play. Plus, the Eastern Conference is going to be a war in the postseason. So let's have these teams go at it with their best. And obviously, the Nets are that much better with Kyrie Irving. Look, can Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving win the East? I would say yes. A year ago, Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving for a couple of games in the Bucks series, and a hobbled James Harden took the Bucks to 7 games in overtime before losing, and the Bucks ultimately won the championship. So you would think that the Nets are still going to be formidable as long as these two guys are healthy and playing well. It's kind of interesting with the Nets. The guy who didn't get the needle is playing in Kyrie Irving, and Ben Simmons, who they traded for a month ago, had to get a needle to see about his herniated disc, and he may not play the rest of the season. He's the key in all of this is Ben Simmons. If Ben Simmons is able to get on the floor, then I think the Nets are really going to be difficult to beat. But even Durant and Kyrie Irving together, they're going to be tough to deal with in any particular series. The interesting thing is, Jet, as we talk now, they're the 8th seed. They would have to play Toronto in the play-in Toronto without Kyrie Irving. If they're able to win that game, they'll be the 7th seed. If they lose, then they would have to beat the winner of 9-10 to be the 8th seed. I would assume Brooklyn's going to get into the playoffs either way. I can't see them losing 2 straight to, say, Toronto and then Charlotte. I just don't see that happening, especially the second game would be with Kyrie Irving at Barclays. I think they'll get in, and they're going to be a very difficult out with those 2 players because Kyrie's playing at a really high level, as is Durant. So yeah, they're going to be a tough out for all the teams in the Eastern Conference.
Yeah, we did our title predictions a week or so ago, Sap. We, both had Brooklyn in the finals,
Yep.
because I think we saw the writing on the wall with this mandate being lifted. Because yeah, it didn't make any sense. Though, I wasn't upset about it because I despise Kyrie and I don't want to see, good things happen for him. And I tweeted this out once the mandate got lifted, Sap, that I think if the Nets do win the NBA championship, I think it's horrible for the NBA. I think it's, worst case scenario for the league because it makes the regular season seem absolutely worthless. And it's rewarding, the behavior of somebody who does not deserve to have his behavior rewarded.
Mhm.
So it's not a great situation for the NBA that the Nets are a legitimate title contender now. Obviously, like you said, if they get Ben Simmons back, they're even more formidable. But just Durant and Kyrie, I think has shown that it's clearly good enough to win a championship in this NBA where there's no super team. And yeah, I mean, I they're probably too far behind uh Cleveland and Toronto right now to avoid the play-in tournament. They are 4.5 games back of Cleveland, and they're 3.5 games back of Toronto.
And Toronto 7 seed right now, right?
And
So
Toronto's the 7th seed, and there's like 9 games left, 10 games left. So probably a little too much ground for them to make up to avoid the play-in tournament altogether. So they'll likely be the 7 or 8 seed.
it sounds like they'll be the 8 seed. I don't even see them catching Toronto, right? Because you said
Well, no,
Toronto's.
I'm saying if they beat Toronto in
if they beat
Toronto,
Toronto,
they're the 7th
right?
seed.
Then the 7 seed, right? If they lose that game to Toronto, then they would play either Charlotte or Washington or whoever, the winner of that matchup, and then they would become the 8 seed. Yeah, so they're going to be the 7 or the 8. They're not going to catch Cleveland for the 6. Which becomes interesting to see what the teams at the top now start to think of. Will the Heat and the Celtics and the Bucks and Sixers try to avoid Brooklyn, which is always kind of risky. You don't want to necessarily start scoreboard watching to the point where it impacts your play. But yeah, they're going to be a tough out. And if they play in Toronto, that could be a tough game because, again, Kyrie wouldn't be there. Toronto, we know, is a well-coached team, something that the Nets aren't. But, when Kevin Durant's on the floor, for the most part, the team he's on is going to be the favorite, and that would be the case even in Toronto without Kyrie Irving.
Yeah, I think you've seen a little bit of standing watching amongst the top contenders in the East right now. There's very little separation between 1 and 4. The Heat have the best record. The Sixers, Bucks, and Celtics are all a game and a half behind, so they're in a virtual tie for the 2 seed right now. And you saw that Philadelphia went into Miami in a game that could have secured them the 1 seed, and didn't play Harden or Embiid, and they still won the game. So I think that was they were trying to lose that one because they don't want to face Brooklyn potentially, and it didn't end up paying off for them. Miami's been struggling a little bit down the stretch here, resting some players. I do think that teams are trying to avoid Brooklyn in the first round, is what it looks like to me.
Yeah, so you want to avoid being the 1 or 2 because Brooklyn can only be the 7 or 8. And I think right now the teams playing the best in the East would be Milwaukee and the Celtics. So I think at this point,
I don't think those teams are trying to avoid Brooklyn right
no.
now. I don't see that. Boston's, we're going to talk about this in a podcast later in the week. Celtics are steamrolling teams. Milwaukee seems to really hit their stride now. But Philadelphia and Miami seem to be tapping the brakes a little bit. I think they are standing watching.
Absolutely. And it would look like Miami, Philadelphia, Milwaukee, and Boston will be 1, 2, 3, 4 in some order because Chicago's kind of fallen on hard times. I saw a stat where Chicago was 2-18 against the top 4 teams in each conference.
That's not good.
That's not good at all. They beat up on the bad teams, but when they play a top 4 team, they're 2-18. I mean, that's just The Pistons are better than that against the top four in the two conferences. Cleveland's not going anywhere. So, yeah, I would think those four teams will finish 1, 2, 3, 4, which will secure them home court advantage. But, yeah, no one wants to play the Nets for a good reason. I mean, last week we were talking about the Nets Golden State being in the finals. The fortunes of the Nets have gotten better now that Kyrie can play the home games, and the fortunes of the Warriors got worse because Steph Curry got hurt against the Celtics and probably is out till the postseason. So we're gonna have to see how that continues on with the Golden State Warriors.
So as far as Ben Simmons is concerned, Sap, it's a herniated disc. It seems to me like the Nets were so desperate to just pull the trigger on the James Harden trade that they didn't really do their due diligence medically on Ben Simmons.
Right. Yeah, I mean, they would have known that, right? You would think, unless it happened since he's been there, which doesn't make any sense since he hasn't really done much. I mean, they did get Seth Curry and Andre Drummond, who can play key roles, but obviously Simmons was a centerpiece of that deal. I don't know if we're going to set a percentage on the chance of Ben Simmons playing this year is less than 50%, I would think.
Yeah, I'd say 30%.
Right. And I mean, again, for the future, it's bright. You can get him straightened out and play next year. And, you know, Kyrie's still fairly young and Durant doesn't look like he's going anywhere. So, you know,
they have no reason to rush him.
No,
really.
No. Again, Durant and Kyrie Irving, if they're healthy through the playoffs, good luck beating them. I mean, you know, Durant, I push back when people say Durant's the best player in the world because I think that title belongs to Giannis. Simply because in the last 3 years, Giannis has played 100 more games than Kevin Durant. It's enough of a difference for me to go with Giannis as the best player in the world. But we know what Durant can do. I mean, as a scorer, there's no one better. And no one who makes it look easier than Kevin Durant. But yeah, these Eastern Conference playoffs are just going to be fantastic. I can't wait.
Do you think this is an injury that's going to be a lingering, impactful injury for the rest of Ben Simmons' career, Sep?
Again, when you're talking about a 6'10" guy, that's always a problem. Backs are a problem, you know. Do they have to go in there and perform surgery? You know, that's a fair question. Yeah, I mean, that could be a problem.
You know, my immediate thought, the first thought I had about this was that, like I just said, that they didn't do their due diligence on his medicals, which is, you know, their own fault for being stupid and just trying to pull the trigger on a trade quickly. But then my other thought was he was away from the Sixers for so long, and, you know, working out with his own trainer and stuff like that. I wonder if there's the possibility for a lawsuit or something like that, where he was injured without working out with the Sixers and he didn't disclose it to a team. Like, yeah. I mean, I don't know I know the injury is a herniated disc. No one seems to have been reported or found out when it happened, how it happened. So I don't know. I think there's more of the story to come out if somebody does some digging.
Yeah, without question. I think they're going to look into that. Again, we're talking about $150, $160 million on his remaining 4 years or however much it is. That's a big contract. Yeah, those are things that will probably be settled in the off season. But, you know, I hope it's not career ending and never want to see that in a player. I'd like to see him come back this year because I think it'd be fascinating to see him play with Kyrie and Durant. I think that would be a really difficult trio to deal with because he does things. He does a lot of the same things that Draymond Green does. So I think he would fit in with Kyrie and Kevin Durant because he doesn't need to score.
Right.
And, you know, they'd be that much stronger because he would add to their defense, their rebounding, facilitation. You know, he can post up down low in the dunker's position and be a nightmare matchup. But I would say it's less than 50% chance that he plays this season.
Yeah, I think mostly because Brooklyn thinks, and I think rightly so, that they can still win without him. So why rush him back if they can, if they still have the chance to win without him? All right, Sap. Well, that's going to do it for us here at the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap. Thanks to Full Press Coverage for presenting the show. As always, you can check out our social medias at JohnSap25, at Jet Stryer to see all the latest thoughts that we have. And check out the YouTube channel, youtube.com/JetStryer, to see the show in its YouTube form. We'll be back later in the week with another podcast talking about the surging Boston Celtics. So it'll be a podcast I'm enthusiastic for, Sap. So we'll be back then. And thanks for listening, everybody. Talk to you later. See ya.